Israel has decided on a full occupation of the Gaza Strip. This was announced late last night that Prime Minister Netanyahu announced that IDF activity is going to move into areas that it has not yet been active, including areas where Israel knows that the hostages are being held, and Israel is moving to a full conquering, a full occupation of the Gaza Strip. Now, in this video, we're going to get into everything that goes into this decision, what the different options were on the table for the Israeli government to choose from, and why this is the choice that they made. To set the stage with this decision, let's go back to a few weeks ago when Hamas rejected the ceasefire hostage release deal that was on the table negotiated by the Americans. Now, according to the Qatari-owned media outlet Al Arabi Al Jadid from July 24th, a few weeks ago, Hamas's demands for a ceasefire are the following. They demand that the IDF forces withdraw from all population centers in Gaza and redeploy along the eastern and northern borders. They also demanded that all humanitarian aid be brought into the Gaza Strip exclusively through UN agencies and the complete disbanding of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. That's the American organization that has been delivering aid directly to Gazan citizens. And as I've explained in a number of previous videos, the reason that Hamas is demanding this is that the only way that they have cash and power is when the humanitarian aid goes through the UN agencies, which even by the UN's own admission means that upwards of 85 to 90% of it goes directly into Hamas's hands, where they then, of course, use it as leverage over the population, and they sell it at exorbitant prices to fuel their organization. So they're demanding a complete dismantling of the U.S. organization, GHF, all aid going through the UN. They also demand a total ceasefire, a total cessation of hostilities, an end of the war, and a commitment that Israel will continue negotiations beyond the initial 60-day ceasefire without resuming hostilities, even if a permanent agreement is not reached. They also demanded a full opening of the Rafah border crossing into Egypt and an increase in the number of Hamas prisoners held in Israeli prisons, including those serving life sentences, meaning including Hamas members who have blood on their hands, who've committed murder. On Israel and the U.S. side, there's a demand that Hamas release all the hostages, completely disarm, and be removed from any role in the Gaza Strip going forward. And that's why there was no ceasefire deal. It seemed that there was a deal in place, but Hamas backed out. And in an earlier video, we talked about Hamas's strategy and why they don't want to make a deal. Key points from that is that Hamas wants to buy time. They want to kick the can down the road because they see that Netanyahu's government is weak and is teetering. His coalition is not so stable right now. And they're hoping that if the Netanyahu government falls sometime in the near future, they could end up negotiating with a post-Netanyahu government that would be more amenable to their demands. They're also seeing that their starvation in Gaza narrative, their information operation that they're running on the world, telling the whole world that Israel's starving the Gazans, is working. They see that there's been a real ramping up of pressure on Israel because of this starvation narrative, and they're trying to increase the pressure on Israel, and that improves their bargaining position. We go back to this decision that Prime Minister Netanyahu announced last night, this decision to occupy Gaza. Let's understand the context in which it was made. So Israel's at this impasse. We realize that there's probably not going to be a deal with Hamas. They have no incentive to make a deal. And meanwhile, the Israelis are still operating in various parts of the Gaza Strip, destroying terrorist infrastructure and tunnels and weapons depots that they're finding. But there's large sections of the Gaza Strip, specifically Gaza City and the central camps in the middle of the Gaza Strip where the majority of the population is, where Israel has not really maneuvered. They haven't moved the IDF in there. And it is believed that that is where the remaining hostages are being held. So this decision is very important to go into those areas and to conquer the entire Gaza Strip. So let's understand the contours of this decision. Now, a couple days ago, there was an article published by Major General Tamir Hyman. He's a retired general from the IDF. He's the director of the Institute for National Security Studies, which is a very important think tank based out of Tel Aviv University, and he's the former head of IDF military intelligence. In this article, he lays out the various options that the Israeli government and the IDF can choose from for how to move forward to end this war once and for all. And he lays out 3 options, and for each of them, he also shares what the pros and cons are in terms of the 2 goals of this war that the Israeli government has laid out. And the 2 goals of the war are the complete defeat of Hamas as both a military and governing entity, and securing the release of all the hostages. I've said many times, and I've written about this in some of the articles that appear in the free ebook that you can download in the description of this video, having 2 goals. Goal number 1, release of all the hostages. Goal number 2, the complete and utter destruction of Hamas as a military and governing entity, at some point come into conflict with each other. Because if you want to completely destroy Hamas, you're going to face the fact that Hamas is going to hold on to some hostages as an insurance policy to prevent you from doing so, meaning that if you want to totally destroy Hamas, you have to at some point give up on some of the remaining hostages. And this is the dilemma that the Israelis have faced all along. So for each of the 3 options that General Hyman lays out in his article, he discusses the pros and cons in terms of these 2 goals. So option number 1 is what he calls the humanitarian city. And this is the option of totally conquering Gaza. The reason he called it the humanitarian city is that in order for Israel to completely conquer the Gaza Strip, it means moving the civilian population out of areas like Gaza City and the central camps of the Gaza Strip to the south, to areas that are fully under IDF control, to get them out of harm's way while the IDF then goes in and completely destroys Hamas and destroys their terrorist infrastructure. Now, in this scenario, the impact on the release of the hostages is obvious. If Israel goes into areas where the hostages are being held, it probably means that the hostages' lives will be in imminent danger. We already saw earlier in the war, you might recall, when the IDF was fast approaching a location where a number of the hostages were being held, Hamas operatives murdered the hostages. They assassinated them just as the IDF was approaching. We could probably expect in this scenario where the IDF moves the civilian population down south and then goes after Hamas in the areas where the hostages are being held, that it puts the lives of the hostages in danger. Now, in terms of the defeat of Hamas, this scenario is the most effective way to defeat them. Hamas would disappear from being a governing authority. It would no longer be an organized military. But let's make no mistake about it, as General Hyman points out, Hamas operatives will still embed themselves in the civilian population that's heading southward. So in this mass migration of civilians into the southern area under IDF control, you will have Hamas operatives in there. Some of the Hamas members will embed themselves underground in what remains of the tunnels, and we could probably expect in any scenario that there will still be guerrilla tactics and guerrilla terrorist activity that is ongoing even after the war is over. Option number 2 is accepting Hamas's conditions, meaning whatever Hamas's demands are, Israel says, okay, we want to get the hostages back. We're willing to accept your demands. We're willing to end the war. We're willing to retreat from the Gaza Strip. Now, the United States and Israel and even some other countries who've come forward lately, including France, might still demand that Hamas not be part of the government of the Gaza Strip in the future. But Hamas, in this scenario where they were not forced to disarm and the Israelis completely withdrew and disbanded the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, allowing the aid to flow into Hamas's hands, in this scenario, Hamas might accept that and play a little bit of a dog and pony show where they pretend to not be part of the new government in Gaza, but they really are behind the scenes. That could happen. In terms of the release of the hostages, in this scenario, probably the majority of the hostages, both alive and deceased, would be released. But again, let's not kid ourselves. Some of them would not be returned anyway. And what would happen here is that Hamas would say, and there might be some truth to it, that they don't even know where some of the deceased are buried. They would also probably claim that some of the living ones are not under their control and that they don't have the ability to get them out, or they might claim that some of the living are deceased and that they don't know where they are, meaning there's really no scenario where Hamas will give every single one of the hostages, alive or dead, back to Israel. So let's make no mistake about that. But in this scenario, more hostages would be returned to Israel than in either of the other two scenarios. In terms of the defeat of Hamas, in this situation, Hamas would actually declare victory because they would point to the withdrawal of Israeli forces, the ceasefire, which would be very popular among the civilians in Gaza. They would point to the fact that the humanitarian aid is now once again under their control, giving them governing authority, giving them financing. And they would also point to all of the prisoners being released from Israeli prisons, being given heroes' welcomes back home. This would increase their popularity. So Hamas would be granted a victory in this scenario. Now, in the third scenario is what General Hyman calls attrition. And that means basically doing what the IDF is doing now. And that means operating in areas that the IDF has control over, destroying tunnels, destroying terrorist infrastructure, and incrementally increasing the size of those areas while not going into Gaza City or the central camps in the Gaza Strip where the hostages are held, allowing Hamas to retain its control there. Under this scenario, the IDF would continue to probably do targeted operations into Hamas-controlled areas and chip away and whittle away at Hamas's military abilities and their governing abilities little by little by little. And that would mean more of what's happening now. The downside of this approach is obvious. The downside of this approach is that it means what looks like a forever war. There's no real end in sight. It means that there's no real plan to completely defeat Hamas. In terms of the hostages, what this scenario would mean is that their condition would continue to worsen as Israel increases the pressure on Hamas and as the war continues to go on. Their conditions would not get any better, but it would also mean that there's always still a possibility for negotiation, and maybe at some point in this, there would be a hostage deal. And that's the game that Israel's been playing for the last little while. So that is an option to continue to just do more of the same. In terms of the defeat of Hamas, in this option, Hamas would continue to be eroded slowly over time, but not fully defeated. And again, if the humanitarian aid keeps coming into the areas that they control, as it currently is, not all of it, but a lot of the aid is, then Hamas could continue to stay alive and kick the can down the road, which, as I said at the beginning of this video, is their entire strategy. They want to buy time in the hopes that they could get a better deal in the future. So just to sum up, the three options that Israel had to choose from, none of which are good: occupation of the Gaza Strip, which means long-term occupation of a hostile population and the gravest of threats to the lives of the hostages. Option number two, which basically is capitulation to Hamas's demands. Hamas gets to declare victory and is not destroyed as a governing and military body, although more of the hostages return to Israel. And option number three, which is more of what Israel is doing now, means that the war has no end in sight and the possible or likely erosion of diplomatic support from the United States. So each one of the options has its pros and cons. That's the environment in which this big decision had to be made.